Nasty.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you for agreeing to come on. It was a carryover from last week in Jordan's question that he asked Ken Babby to reflect on his past coaching and past experiences over many years. And it caught Ken a bit off guard. And I know Jordan talked to you and I've talked to you, and you want to. I want to like you. I don't know that you need to introduce yourself to anybody in this group. You've been on before with all of them. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to let you tell your story, and we'll have questions intermittently that will uh, prod our curiosity and everybody else's. So go ahead, Peter.
Well, thanks, Wally. Appreciate the invite to talk a little bit about my journey. I actually enjoy talking about it because it's what I consider to be a good journey, certainly. So I'll just talk a little bit about kind of how I got started and the direction that the team took over the years, and hopefully it'll stimulate some questions that you might have, or actually stimulate some conversation and discussion that we can have. I think that's the beauty of this group, is that you never know what direction it's going to take, and I think that that's a good thing. So, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I think that there's a how you learn to coach and what you learn about coaching. And, obviously there's a combination of them both, but, I'll talk a little bit about how I learned to coach. And as with all of you, a lot of that has to do with experience and education. And experience, when I think about my experience, it's as an athlete myself, and as a parent, as a teacher. I think all of those experiences blend into what formulated how I learned to coach. And as an athlete, I was, and that's a long time ago, admittedly, but I was a multi-sport athlete. Back in the day, you did everything. It wasn't just about hockey 365. So I played a ton of sports. Sort of three main sports, if you will, were hockey, football, and swimming, which seems like a sort of an odd combination, I know. But and I learned from all of those sports, and I learned from all of those coaches that I had. And in football, football was interesting because in football I learned a lot about organization and structure, planning, and preparation. Had really good football coaches. They were real well, and this is a long time ago, and they were real well organized. They were probably out ahead of the curve. Our head coach was a former CFL player, played in the NCAA as well. So learned a lot there. Swimming, my swimming career, I was a summer swimmer, and then I took up swimming full time actually which is a bit odd, after my hockey career was over. And in swimming, again, learned some different things, learned about training. That was really where I started to figure out some stuff about physiology, biomechanics, psychology, all that sort of stuff. Swimming was very scientifically based, even back then. And then there was my hockey career. Now, hockey was always my first love. It's probably the sport that I did the best. But I never had great coaching in hockey. And probably in hockey, what formulated my coaching in hockey was I learned what not to do in coaching, which seems a bit odd. But really, that's what it was all about. Hockey in the 70s, and there's lots of people on this call who can relate to that. Hockey in the 70s was way different than the way hockey is now. It wasn't particularly scientifically based. It wasn't particularly structured. Practices were more throw the puck out and play. There was a lot of fighting. I eventually got fed up in junior hockey with, I got tired of hitting guys in their fists with my face, and that wore kind of thin after a period of time. And that's why I migrated to swimming. There's less fighting in swimming, and I actually was hoping to qualify for, I was a good swimmer. I was hoping to qualify for the Olympics in 1976. I didn't make it, but it was a good journey, certainly. And when I went to McGill as a student, I actually ended up, I could have played hockey or swam. I ended up swimming, which I enjoyed. I enjoyed that part of it. So anyway, that being said, I learned a lot as an athlete that sort of dictated how I learned to coach, if you will. And then there was my education part of it. Went to McGill, did a bachelor degree in physical education, and really, really enjoyed that. I wasn't a very good student up until then, but in phys ed, I really got an awful lot out of it. Learned how to teach, learned how to coach. Tremendous amount of, at McGill, it's science-based. There was a lot of physiology and psychology and biomechanics. So that was, for me, that was real interesting. And then I did a master's degree in sports psychology after I did my undergrad degree, which again was a real area of interest for me. And then I started working at McGill, and I was running recreational sports and teaching phys ed skills courses. I was coaching tennis. Yeah, I know it's a bit odd again. I was coaching tennis, squash, and golf when I first started at McGill. I had a background in all of those sports. And then I was running the hockey schools at McGill. Out in the community, I was a skills coach, ran a lot of practices at various groups for guys, girls, all the way from Pee-wee all the way up to junior. I helped out and mentored coaches out in the community. So I'd been at McGill for a period of time, and women's hockey at McGill was a club level sport. And then in 1999, after the Olympics in 98, in 1999, they decided that there was a reevaluation of the varsity programs at McGill, and women's hockey was a sport that they had an interest in supporting, providing resources to. So they had a real interest in elevating women's hockey from a club level sport to a varsity level sport. Our director of athletics at the time knew that I was coaching. I was coaching out in the community. I was coaching my daughters out in the community. I had a hockey background. I was working full-time at McGill. Came to me, said, we need a full-time coach. Would you be willing to coach the women's hockey team? And so I said, sure, I'll do that. I was interested in coaching, at that level. But that level was quite a bit different than that level is now, certainly. We had very few resources when I first started. I remember going up to the rink and looking at the women's hockey team didn't really have a team room. They just had a room, and then there was kind of a locker with all their equipment in it. And I looked at the equipment that was in the locker and said, oh my God, it was a disaster. And I was running intramural hockey at the time, and we used to lend out hockey equipment. So what I did is I went across the rink, and I just purchased intramural hockey equipment. So I went across the rink and took all the intramural hockey equipment that I purchased and put it in the girls' locker room, and took all the girls' stuff and put it in the intramural room so that we at least had some good equipment. I think the statute of limitations is up on that now. So, matter of fact, I'm retired, so they can't fire me anyway. But we didn't have a whole lot, and we didn't even have practice jerseys. The girls would have, their own different colored jerseys on, and we didn't have a lot of skill. Really, when I look back that first year, we kind of had 7 players, 7 skaters who could kind of play the game, and then we had a whole bunch of others who couldn't really play the game. But we had a pretty good goaltender, and Kim was our goaltender. Kim St. Pierre was our goaltender, and that made up for for a lot of things, including the poor coaching, I guess. My approach that year was all about skill development, really, because that's what I had done. That's what my background was. Spent a lot of time developing skills. And in actual fact, that year we lost in the finals at the CIS championship to Alberta that year, which was amazing that we got there. And Kim was a big part of that, obviously. We lost 1-0 to Alberta in a pretty competitive game. We could defend really well. We couldn't score, but we could defend really well. And obviously Kim was a big part of that. But I did want to mention when I was coaching out in the community again, talk a little bit about experience. Geez, I gained so much experience over the 5 or 6 years that I coached in the community. I coached a team that was a U20 team. And when I say U20, it wasn't made up of 19 and 20-year-olds or 18 and 19-year-olds. It was made up of players who were from 12 to 19 years of age. So you talk about a challenge back then. They were mostly former ringette players. I mean, this is 35 years ago when women's hockey was just kind of coming to the forefront, if you will. But it was great. I learned so much coaching that group, and the diversity that I had within that group was really a lot of fun. It was a challenge, but it was great. And so when I got to McGill, or when I started coaching at McGill, the skill development part of it came really easy. The teaching part of it came really easy. The tech-tac part took a little bit longer, and I needed to do some catch-up there, which I knew and was a focus of my own development. Certainly. But what I found when I started coaching the Martlets was that there needed to be a change in culture. What we had was a group of really good people, but it was still a club level. They were partiers. I remember Wednesday nights was ladies' night at ladies' night at Cheers. They'd all go for that, and the next day practice would be a little rough. It's kind of funny now. I have to encourage the girls to go out in my towards the end of my career. I had to encourage them to go out. For them, we play now. Now we play like on a Friday night and have nothing on Saturday, Sunday. And remind the girls, okay, girls, it'd be a good time to go out and have some fun, go out in the town. And on Monday, I'd ask them what they did, and they say, yeah, we had a potluck, and then we all went to the library. Times have really changed. But anyway, so back then we obviously needed a little bit of a shift in culture and to figure out, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted, because when I started coaching with the Martlets, I was, I was 40-ish. I was a parent. I had coached a lot. I taught, I had my own values really that were kind of established, if you will. So, and I think that was an advantage, if you will. I knew kind of what I wanted. I had lots of confidence in myself. I wasn't a 23-year-old recent grad and kind of figuring things out as I went along. And not that I had everything figured out, certainly, but I think that was an advantage to have that experience, if you will, in establishing the culture here at McGill. And what I really wanted was obviously, like everybody, I wanted a culture of excellence, where everything mattered and that people worked hard and bought in and shared values and shared vision. But I also wanted to win, and I don't shy away from that. I wanted an environment where winning was important. And I think the key, really, that I focused on was the development aspect of things, the development of certainly a holistic approach as students, as athletes, and as people, as leaders. And what I really wanted was a culture or an environment, if you will, where, the players' appreciation of their McGill experience, it wasn't based solely on how much ice time they got, that there was other things that were involved in terms of their development, and that their value wasn't entirely based on how many goals that they scored. And I think that that's an important part of establishing the culture. Yes, ice time was based on performance. That's absolutely for sure. But it had to be an enjoyable situation for all the players. And that was important to me. I love the game. I like to have fun. I like to enjoy it. I wanted practices to be fun, based on development, but and part of the fun was getting better every day. So that was really the culture that I was interested in establishing. And so the question is, how did I, what were some of the things that I did kind of on that note? And obviously recruiting was a big part of it. So the first year, or after the first year, as soon as our season was over, out on the road, recruited 11 players, which back then was a lot to recruit. A lot of Leaside players, certainly, and others, which is very true. But the reality is, of those 11 players, only 4 of those 11 players actually played to graduation. They all graduated from McGill, but only 4 of them had a career that was 4 or 5 years in length, because every year there were other players who were coming in. Back then, the development curve was extremely steep. Every year there were better players that were coming in. And that was hard. I found that it was difficult, but I also made the decisions that I felt were going to help our team improve and get better. And what we look for were players who, well, first of all, admission into McGill was a big thing. Getting into McGill is not easy. It's not like going to Brown, for example, where they accept just about anybody. It was, it's hard to get into McGill. And so, I go, yeah. So I'd go watch a hockey game and I'd ask, okay, who are the smart girls? Who's got over 90% average? And then look, maybe there's 3 or 4 smart girls on that Least Side team. And I look at them and see, see if they had the skill, character, etc., to be able to play for McGill. So recruiting to McGill, in some ways, the field is narrow, but on the other hand, you get some real smart kids. Generally they're hard workers. It's kind of interesting at McGill, and I'm sure it's probably the same at a lot of schools, that the individuals, the students who excel at McGill, let me back it up. Students who get into McGill have really good marks. And the students who have gotten the marks through being brilliant sometimes aren't the most successful ones at McGill. The students who are the most successful are the students who are brilliant and work really hard. And what I found that was exactly the same thing in the hockey, is that sometimes players came in who were really skilled, but if they didn't work hard, they didn't get any better. And some of those players fell by the wayside, even though they were really skilled. And the players who were successful with the Martlets are the ones who came in who had some skill and that they worked really hard. And that was no different than sort of the regular student body. And so that's what we look for is players who had some skill, but who worked hard and were willing to be committed to the program and buy in. And then the other big part of it is we look for players who wanted to come to McGill. And that's a really big part of our recruiting process, was that we weren't interested in arm twisting anybody to come. Montreal's a great city, McGill's a great school. We have a pretty good hockey program. So recruiting players who wanted to be in that environment was really important for us. We never twisted anybody's arm to come to McGill. And then subsequently what happened is that we end up with a whole room of players who want to be there. And I think that's huge. I'm a happy guy. I wanted a happy team. If you make promises to people, they get unhappy. If the players are unhappy, I find it extremely difficult. So, I don't think we can make people happy, but I think we can try and get happy people. And I think that made a big difference in terms of our culture building, if you will. And a lot of players recruited us. A lot of players, a coach would, like Kim, for example, would say, hey, Peter, I've got this player, real bright, great marks. McGill's their number one choice. And so when we would hear things like that, now we would go and take a look and, take a player like that, even if they weren't well coached, take a player like that, if you will. And they would fit in, those types of players, the players who wanted to be here. So anyway, another thing that we did is, or that I did was on our team, as I said, a lot of the recruited players were better than the veterans. And as you all know, that can be upsetting if upsets the apple cart a little bit as you go along. So we had to kind of figure out how to get through that. And one of the things that we, and also when I started at McGill, with that kind of party group, if you will, there was initiation that would happen with the team, and it was fairly mild. It wasn't anything. And don't forget, this was a long time ago. It was well before the anti-hazing stuff came about. I mean, I went through initiation when I was a varsity athlete, and it was kind of fun actually, but times change. But we were kind of ahead of the curve back then. I looked at it. I'm thinking, what, a lot of these incoming players are going to play more. They're going to be on the power play. They're going to take a leadership role. We need to immerse them within the team as quickly as we possibly can. And so what we did is we initiated the idea of a team building retreat, and that was huge. I think every team probably does it, but for our team, that was huge in terms of development of our team and of our culture. We don't use the term rookie on our team. We use the term first year player, second year player, third year player, whatever it is. We got away from using the term rookie because, again, we wanted incoming players to feel part of it right away. And on our team retreat, that was a big part of it, is that how we ran our team retreat and what we did when we first started it. I was, like I had, I was doing basically everything on the team retreat. And as it evolved, what happened is the players took more ownership in it. They really valued the retreat. They planned it. They came up with activities that were competitive in nature, but cooperative as well. That the first year players had an opportunity to be immersed within the team and learn the values of the team, not just from me, but from their teammates. And I think in terms of development, that's huge. We used to, one of the things we used to do was the first years would put on a little bit of a skit for the team, like an entertainment. And then eventually we had to get away from that because it was felt that we were, not by us, but you weren't allowed to isolate first year players. So now everybody would put on a skit and it would be hilarious. And the reason we did it with the first year players putting on a little bit of entertainment, it was to get the chance for the first year players to know each other, if you will. But now we got around that and do some other things. And the players are unbelievably creative. Honestly, I would just sit back and watch what was going on. There was lots of debriefs of the activities and learning. The leadership on the team would talk a little bit about some of the guidelines on the team. We didn't have rules; we had guidelines, and some of the things that that I didn't even know about. When I first started, they sort of implemented this rule that 24 hours, no going out or drinking or anything like that 24 hours before a game. I'm going, okay, that's fine, that works. And then all of a sudden it evolved, and had nothing to do with me. All of a sudden it evolved into 48 hours before the game. I'm sitting there and I'm watching them, and they came up with these guidelines that they wanted to have to make sure that the team was competitive and did well and was successful. And I thought that was great. So anyway, that team building retreat was huge in terms of our development of our culture. And then we would revisit it, often through the year, of having activities, either before practices or after practices or whatever it was. And a lot of these were generated by the players themselves, who, as I said, took ownership in it. Other part of the culture development was the leadership development of the team. I thought there was a strong need to develop our leadership, and to develop our leadership not from the top down, but from the bottom up. So that the leadership development that we tried to go through was about developing the younger players on the team, not only the veteran players, but the younger players on the team as well. We involved them a great deal with decision making, with leadership meetings that we would have. We would have a captain's meeting. We called it a leadership meeting. We'd have a captain's meeting that involved not only the captains, but 2 or 3 younger players as well. Make sure that all the younger players got an opportunity to be exposed to that kind of experience, if you will. And subsequently, what happened is that we had leadership that we developed as with young players, and as they went through their career, that carried along, if you will. We didn't get to players who were in their 4th or 5th year and all of a sudden say, okay, now you're a leader on the team. What is it that you do? So that continual leadership development was real important. The values on the team were driven by me to start off with, but certainly the values on the team were perpetuated. And I think, again, when it comes to developing culture, what happens in the room when you're not there as the coach, I think, is the most important thing. And I think that we got to the stage where certainly we were all singing the same song. We were all teammates. Even though the coaches weren't players, we're all teammates, and we all wanted to be good role models to each other. Tried to empower the players as much as we could. When I go into the room between periods, I ask the players what they see. You know, and the group had a lot of trust. They knew that nobody was going to get hung out to dry if somebody brought up something that wasn't quite, you know, what we were looking for. But the players felt very comfortable to talk. Yeah, I would say, Wally asked that question. It was a couple of years, certainly. Well, the whole thing was a developmental process, certainly. And I would say the first 5 years were a lot of building and development as we went along. But empowering the players, I think, was huge. And I mean, it was little things. When we first started, you know, like any CIS program back 30 years ago or 25 years ago when we started, you know, there was the coach, and the coach did everything. I mean, I was sharpening skates and putting out the jerseys before, you know, games and all that sort of stuff. And so I implemented that the players would kind of take care of the room. So they would do the vacuuming. So they had a schedule. They'd vacuum the room. You know, after we won a couple of national championships, you know, we'd have first year players come in and say, we're national champions and we vacuum our own room. And but interestingly enough, the players really bought into that kind of stuff. They took ownership in what they did. They took pride in what they did. They weren't pampered or babied. And eventually the players just they'd make up a vacuuming schedule. I mean, we had some players who would come in and ask, what's a vacuum? But they figured it out, and some of those lease side players. But they figured it out as they went along. And again, I think it's little things, but you know, and I mentioned this before about the players. You know, they come into the office and before and after practices or games and say hi, coach, and I get a chance to ask them how school was going and that kind of stuff. And you know, really, I think leadership development is all about building relationships. And you know, I used to keep notes on players. You know, I'd have a book and I'd keep notes, and like I'd know what their sister and brother's names and their parents is, and you know what high school they went to, what their dog's name, all that sort of stuff. One, because I was interested, and two, I could ask them about, you know, how things were going back at home. And you know, so I think developing that bond, if you will, that relationship. I mean, I was never the player's friend, but I was always friendly with the players, certainly. And they always felt comfortable with coming in and sitting down and talking. And I think that was, again, an important part of building our culture and building our leadership. I remember early in my career, a player told me, said, you know, that one of her teammates had said to her, you know, Peter seems to really like me, but he doesn't play me. And I think that was sort of indicative of kind of, you know, what I tried to establish. I liked all the players, and I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to build a relationship with all of them, but it didn't mean that they were all going to play. And that goes back to kind of the idea of wanting them to have a really good experience, regardless of ice time. And it worked in some cases. In some cases, as you know, ice time is important for hockey players. So there were certainly some challenges there as we went along. And I learned a lot from the players. You know, again, when I first started, I was like a kind of an older brother, you know, maybe a little bit, quite an older brother. And then I evolved into sort of a father figure. And at the end of my career, I was a grandfather figure. But that was okay. I tried to keep up with the players. I tried to keep up in the sense, and not on the ice, but keep up with the players in the sense that, you know, in terms of what they, you know, what the evolution or generational evolution was with the players. I think that was important. I tried to make changes and learn as I went along. I mean, you know, my parenting was a big part of that as well. I mean, I was parent to girls and, you know, who went through athletic careers and academic careers and all that. So I had a little bit of insight and empathy, if you will, for those situations, certainly. Um, but one of the things that I also developed early before I started coaching at McGill is that my coaching wasn't the coaching of the Martlets wasn't gender based. So I never really, so my coaching was based on developing an environment, a culture, if you will, that didn't really have anything to do with gender. Um, and what I mean by that is, so I'll give you an example. Like when I first started, I remember our team wasn't all that inclusive when I first started. I mean, there were, and I remember there was some, players talking behind other players' backs. And it came to I mean, again, we're talking 25 years ago, and it came to my attention. And so I mentioned it. So we're having a meeting, and I mentioned it. I go, look, girls, apparently there's some gossip going on, and we talked about it a little bit. And so I said, well, like, why does this happen? And one of the players said to me, because we're girls. And I thought to myself, well, really, what has that got to do with it? I mean, if you want to establish an environment where excellence, success, development, um, strong values, all those things, and I'm not sure that an environment is necessarily genetically oriented. So, so and there were a lot of stereotypes I found when I started coaching female hockey. A lot of stereotypes, a lot of generalizations, and I'd hear all the time about, well, you can't do that with girls. I'm thinking to myself, well, why can't you? Like, why not? And I remember one of the ones I heard was, well, girls want to know why, and guys want to know how. And I think to myself, well, I'm a guy. I want to know why. I know lots of guys who want to know why, and I know lots of girls who don't want to know why. And so for me, it was about establishing a culture and environment that was strong in nature, that I wanted to get away from any kind of stereotype, if you will. Um, because for me, stereotypes and generalizations are limiting. And I didn't want to limit the development of the players either. Well, when I say players, as these student athletes, I didn't want to have any limitation, and I didn't want to be determining any limitation in terms of their development as students, as people, as athletes. And so that was the approach that I took. Like, I don't think you'll hear me very often say, um, Anyway, but I did want to comment, Wally, that I think two things. One, I think when you ask a coach, often when you ask a coach about coaching and their background and all that, they do talk about what they've learned about coaching. So the seminars they've been on, and certainly some of the other things that have built up their CV, if you will. And what to me the biggest interest is how you learn to coach. And that's your background. Knowledge comes from experience and education, and a lot of that happens before you ever get to coaching, if you will. There was a really good, I think it was the NHL Coaches Association. There was a good talk with Rod Brendamore, John Cooper, and Pete DeBoer. If you get a chance to take a look at it, it's real good because, you have Cooper and DeBoer, who were, kind of career coaches, didn't have the playing careers. And then you had Brendamore, who basically, when his career was over as a coach, as a player, got into coaching. And so kind of interesting perspectives. And Rod Brendamore is a very humble guy, or at least in that interview, he came off as being very humble. And he basically was great. He said, hey, I didn't know anything about coaching. I was a player. I never really wanted to be a coach. And all of a sudden I got thrown into this coaching stuff and I had to figure out stuff that was going along. So there's lots of different paths to get there, but that's how he learned to coach. And he's certainly had, well, and I would agree with that, Tim, that they were both, kind of got to that level. Whereas Brendamore, he's done a super job, but different pathways, if you will. And the other thing,
I'm just curious, Peter, and this might be, I'm turning the clock back real far on you, but I know when I went down to the States to play, there was a choice of sort of McGill, U of T, or the Ivy League, and they all kind of sat in the same spot in terms of the hockey that was available, as well as the academics. And I think that's still true today. And I've always said that to my players, that, the experiences you're going to get academically at those two institutions are going to be very similar to the Ivy League. But I know when I went down in the late 90s, a lot of Canadian players were going down to the States, and specifically to the Ivy League schools. And that continued for those of us who are a little nerdy. How did, like, you already sort of said, that you wanted people who wanted to come to McGill, but I would assume that a lot of the players you looked at were also looking at, say, Karen's team at U of T or at the Ivy League. So how did you differentiate what you were doing there? Or was it, simply, as you said, looking at people who really wanted to be at McGill exclusively?
The recruiting, well, first of all, one of the cornerstones of recruiting was I never used any reverse kind of recruiting, if you will. So I never, like, if somebody told me that, I'm looking at Dartmouth or Brown or Yale or McGill, I'd encourage them certainly to look at the whole package, if you will. They couldn't make a bad choice. Now, somebody told me that they were looking at McGill and then some other institution, NCAA institution, for example, that didn't have the same sort of academic standards that McGill had, then I would think to myself, I don't know what it is a McGill person, really, because if now their focus isn't necessarily on academics. So big part of our process was on the academic end of things. Staying in Canada, we definitely highlighted that. Give them the opportunity. So, because again, depending upon what they wanted to go into, there was a benefit of staying into Canada. For example, if they wanted to be a teacher or a doctor, if they were to go and take a degree south of the border, when they would come back to Canada and wanted to do a medical school, they might not have the requisites to be able to get in. And we get a ton of students who want to be doctors. There's no getting around it. So that would be, for example, and I would encourage them to look to make sure that their academic profile fit into what they wanted to do down the road. Yes, some of it was about hockey and hockey development and the coaching and all of that, but it was mostly a focus on academics that we have in terms of our recruiting process. And that doesn't mean that we're only looking for nerds who can't skate. No, we're looking for the whole package, if you will. There's, and I mean, Queens, sometimes we'd lose players to Queens too. And that was a real, oh my God, that was.
Peter, just to finish the thought, I'm going to steal your term accidental coach, and perhaps Matt would call himself one of those. And I am certainly one of those. But that's now how I'm going to refer to myself, as an accidental coach. And I'm sure I was pre-med at Dartmouth, so we all know how that worked out. But there you go. So thank you for that. I'm going to be keeping that one for a long time.
Matt's like of CIS hockey, lawyer, law school, all that, and then get into coaching hockey. But I will comment, Kim. I said this before. I mean, one of the satisfactions that certainly that I have is not only that they move on in terms of their professional vocations and careers, but also that they still love the game. And all are great examples. They're both coaching. They both got kids who play, both boys and girls. They're really into it, and that's satisfying. I would hate for somebody to leave McGill and hate the game of hockey. That's not a good thing at all. So I think that's
well, I'm not
fun.
sure if you taught Paula how to play squash, but she and I play together. So
she's competitive, eh?
Yeah, I'm one step ahead of her right now, but she's hell bent on catching me. So you can imagine what those squash games look like. They look like hockey in a box.
Yeah, I can imagine. Some were two big parts of it when I first started at McGill. Great, they were two of the players who could actually play when I first started. They were good. Certainly. Sammy, your hand's up again.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sammy. Not so much a question, but a comment, Peter, and always love listening to you. I just wanted to encourage everybody, anybody that's on the as a coach's site membership, there's a really good 20-minute sort of piece. The guy's name is Cassidy Preston. He's an ex-OHL guy, and Chris DiPietro. They do a 20-minute piece on the TV series about the Leafs called It's All or Nothing. And their little piece is called It's Not All or Nothing. And I think the pertinent point, and I thought of it when you were talking about at the top, Peter, about how you wanted to create an environment of excellence, of course, and focused on development of the people and the players. But yeah, you wanted to win. And that's exactly what this column is about. They warn kind of against, like for the young coaches, it's kind of an easy thing in some ways to get to a point where you say, yeah, I'm all about process. But they warn against being all about process so you get the results. And the important thing, and I think it's a credit for you, like I think you were one of the coaches that managed to focus on the process for and of itself. And then the results either come or don't come, but more often than not, they would come. But it's kind of a good 20-minute little
that's good.
Listen about, the process is what it's all about. Make them better players, make them better people. As we all know, you can't control the outcomes anyway. So we go back to Wally's, hey, you win or you learn. And that's what it's all about. So any of the coaches out there that have the coaches site, you might want to seek that out. It's just kind of an interesting little 20-minute listen.
After about 2006, every preseason meeting that we had talk about our goal for the season, our ultimate competitive goal for the season was to win a national championship. We would talk about that. We would put it out there on the table, and then we would never say it again over the course of the season, what we were talking steps that we had to do in order to get to the goal that we wanted to have. It was there, it was out there, it was often in the room. We would talk about it, but then that was it. That was the end of that. And we focused on practices and shifts and games and all that sort of stuff as we went along. So it was always there. But
just to follow up on that, because that's one of the things I wrote down as Sammy was talking. I was thinking about this, and I remember my thought was, it's difficult, or a difficult balancing act when you're in a successful environment, like you had at McGill at that point, and like they have obviously at Hockey Canada, and same at Hockey USA. And if you're in a really successful environment where anything but a championship is sort of unacceptable on some level, it complicates that focus on the process. But in lots of ways, it makes it even more important. And that's what these guys talk about on the coaches side. Yeah. Is it's one of the things maybe the Leafs are missing, is they need to let go of the fact that they got to win in the first round and just go and play and focus on the minute-to-minute process. And I remember distinctly at the 2005 World Championship, Sammy, in Finland, talking at a meeting about focusing on the process, not worried about are we going to win the gold or not, but let's focus on, like, again, for one of Wally's things, on win, what's important now, our next shift, our next battle, our next race. And one of the players piped up and said, bullshit. We have to win the gold medal. That's it. So it's a tough balance in environments like that. But it's even more incumbent and important for the coaches to double down and really focus on what's important now, like your next battle, the next period, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. Except I think we were in Sweden in 2005, but lost in a shootout. But anyway, that's okay. Matt.
Yeah, the bench recognizes Matt Holmberg.
Is he still there?
I don't know if I was next, but I'll jump in. Great to see everyone here. Happy New Year. Peter, I jumped in a little bit late, but I caught the majority of it. And I had a front row seat to a lot of what you were talking about as well. So great to hear all of it and great to see all of you. And, and I've expressed this to you directly, Peter, but for the benefit of everyone else, I think it's good for them to hear as well. I started in as head coach in 2009. And really where I didn't really have a mentor, right? And so I was forced to sort of seek some guidance elsewhere, and including with Wally, as I think most of you know. But very quickly I realized that I could look east down the 401 and see an example of some cultural excellence at McGill already, and Queens and McGill having similar universities and some of the similar pros and cons, I guess. It was quite easy for me, I guess, to look at the model that Peter had already set, and by then in 2009 you were already winning lots of championships. And so I would quite shamelessly and selfishly try to set up as many exhibition games as I could with you guys, because we were in different conferences. So unless we met at nationals, which we did at least once, I think, that was the only time to basically listen and watch and ask questions. And I learned a lot that way. And you were always engaging and always accessible, and there was no reason for you to do so. It's just part of your nature and part of your personality. And I know you were very busy, but I was always grateful for all of those opportunities. And I'm still trying to chase that excellence, and still trying to find that consistent excellence that you were able to bring to McGill. So thank you for all of that, Peter.
Thanks for those kind words, Matt. I mean, I always enjoyed certainly our games and our discussions even more so. Really enjoyed it. One of those regrets that I have is Napanee in 2017 and losing Alberta in overtime there in the game that I thought we should have won, but
Yeah.
that's not my only memory of Queens, believe me. And as I told you before, my dad's a Queens grad, so there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me continue to go on that road though and pick your brain on something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Peter. So you mentioned earlier about vets and you know, recruiting and bringing in better players type of thing, and that's a sign of a program that's continuing to get better, right? And you know, we try to have a culture where it's largely you know, behavior driven, rewarding good habits, that sort of thing, right? And but performance and player development obviously are a big part of, you know, the team success, is where you've had to go to a fourth or fifth year vet who has done everything right from a behavior, from an attitude, from a habits perspective, but their development has just not got to the point where you know, you would hope they would be, I suppose, through no fault of their own or yours even, and that there's players coming in that whose performance or development require them to take that spot. And have you ever been in that spot and had to actually release those players, and what did you do?
Yeah, yes, it's happened, but I think that I think I failed if I get to a point where I have to have that conversation with a veteran, if you will, during a season or coming up to the playoffs or where it is. I will have failed if I'm having that conversation at that time. I think it's foresight that you have to really develop. And so the previous year, maybe towards the end of the previous year, is where you really have to plant the seed and make decisions. So the decision would be, you know what, I don't think this player is going to fit. And I have cut certainly fourth year players or talk them into perhaps retiring and move on, or have a conversation to say over the course of the summer what it is that they need to do to be able to get better, and maybe advise them that their role on the team the following year could diminish, but they still need to be a contributor. And how can they contribute to the success of the team, even though their role on the ice may diminish over the course of the season? Tough conversations for sure. But I think I would much rather cut a veteran at the end of their third or fourth year than have that be an issue halfway through their fifth year, their fourth or fifth year, if you will. Some real tough decisions in terms of making that happen. And I've again, sort of the song that I sing with them, a couple of things is, no, we didn't have any bad players. You know, I mean, after our first couple of years, we didn't have any bad players on the team. They were all good. They could all play. But the reality is there's a hierarchy of ability and performance on the team. And so if a player wasn't playing, it wasn't because they weren't good. It was just that there were other players who played ahead of them, who accomplished on the ice some things that maybe that player, that they were better at, the player who wasn't playing. And so again, if you have that that philosophy, if you will, if you have that mojo on the team that the players know and understand, they're not bad players, but players play better. They're, you know, like virtually everybody on our team could play on the power play. Everybody could, but there are some players who are better at it. And again, that would be a constant reminder of you know, that the top performers were going to play more. I mean, we were a 4-line team, but not everybody played the same amount of time. Everybody played, but not everybody played the same amount of time. Not everybody played in a situation. What broke my heart the last year I was coaching, I had a third-year kid, great kid, super kid, but kind of lost her confidence, lost her way. Players leaped ahead of her. She didn't play in the power play, didn't play in the penalty kill. She was probably the only player on the team who didn't have a role on either of those. And she was a vet. Broke my heart, really. But what we worked on real hard is getting her to a spot where she was going to compete again for those situations on the team. And over the course of the summer, she got her head straight. She got a little bit more confidence. And the years that she came back, then boom, she was a good player on the team. So again, I don't know whether I've answered your question or not, Matt, but I think, you know, I think what's important in those situations is to look ahead as to what's going to happen And can I keep this player and not have her be disruptive based on the role that she's going to play on the team? Or am I better off in cutting the cord and moving on?
Yeah, no, absolutely answer to Peter. I appreciate that. And then, yeah, you touched on it. Timing is a big part of it. The foresight is really important. And it's always hard when, the player's coming to you and saying, I've done everything you've asked. I've been the model player, and you can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Right. And yet you're still demoting them. Right. And that's a tough talk, but it's part of pushing the program along at the same time.
And again, highlighting the fact that they're not bad people, they're not bad players, but there are others who are ahead of them, and that's the reality. And I think once you get away from that and you get to that entitlement kind of thing, where I'm playing all my fourth and fifth players because they're in their fourth and fifth year, then you're really in trouble. I mean, if you hold the line and you play players based on their ability to perform. Then I think that you're in a better spot to be, and totally transparent in terms of what it is that you're doing with it too makes a big difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Peter and Matt, Jordan wanted this to be created in terms of what do we learn now, and I'm listening to both of you talk, and I go back to 2002, Sammy. Like I wouldn't coach a team that had anybody not play on either or the power play or penalty kill. They got to be capable of feeling valued. And that's what I agreed to with take the job at Hockey Canada. And I told Melody and Danielle, you bring in club team, you bring in the best club team players. They all play power play and penalty kill. Probably all power play and not penalty kill.
Yeah, probably.
And that's the point. Now you get them on the national team. And that's where you have to let them feel valued. And we agreed 10 penalty killers, 10 power plays halfway through the season, the year of centralization. We morphed into earning the roles they earned. Now, I don't know how to master that formula with a club team, but that's a dilemma that the Leafs have, the Oilers have, and the Flames are struggling with. Do your players, every member of your team, feel valued, or are you outcome oriented and shortening that bench, deterring their belief in themselves to perform at their best? That's the line of the art of coaching, is making everybody feel valued versus your decision and timing of how much you're going to use. And Peter, I watch you all the time back in that era when I was working in Hockey Canada. And I watched all coaches and how they manage the bench. And when you have superstars like Daou, and I look for that, and I watch Team Canada recently, and when I see double shifting of power play people on the penalty kill at a tryout camp, central with two teams there, one's the U22 team and the other's the senior team, and both teams are shortening the bench. They're not developing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's my whole key point is I felt, Peter, when in my role at Hockey Canada, I felt that's what I wanted every coach coming in to understand. And every coach at Hockey Alberta, Hockey Ontario, you name it, they're there to develop the players. Our role, representing Hockey Canada, was develop the coaches in terms of understanding the importance of development, transmitting belief, and not shortening the bench, but managing the bench. And I think the art of it gets down to earning ice time, taking it away behaviorally in terms of unacceptable things that go on, but trusting in them to do the role, but they have to have a role.
Yeah.
So that's
And-
my 2 bits worth from, my 15 years, past 15 years of experience. And that's all I'm dealing with now in minor hockey, Peter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They're
no,
shortening the bench. That's what they're doing. And
yeah,
they're trying to win the game. And we all are. And Tim right now with Team Denmark, the transmission of belief, identifying and creating roles. Well, he's not the head coach, but I'm sure the philosophy of transmitting belief is critical. And I wanted to get my 2 bits in. Sammy, go ahead.
Just if I could, Sammy, again, I'm going to interrupt you. I apologize before you get started, but I think, again, part of that, Wally, is on our team. And I said this earlier, is that the individual's value wasn't solely based on how much ice time they were getting or how many goals they were scoring. And I think that that's an important part of it as well, that everybody on the team was valued. Some players played more, that's true. But building those relationships with the players, making sure that they had an enjoyable experience, all of that is part of it. I mean, it's not the only thing, but it's certainly part of it. And, when you talk about power play and penalty kill, I was, at the beginning of the year, everybody would, practice on the power play and everybody would know it and understand it and learn it. And eventually we would morph into the fact that there were power play players and there were PK players. And there was just so much pride with the PKers, to thwart the power play. And there was, it was just, they took value and what they're, all the glitz is with the power play. And all the ice bags and bruises are with the PK, but they took so much pride in that as we would go along. They had a role, they had value. So I agree with you 100%. That it was certainly more difficult, as I said, out in Calgary. But Sammy, go ahead.
It's okay. I'm used to being the backup a lot of the time. It's fine. I know my role. So I have 2 quick comments and then a question, but I'm assuming you knew my swimming background only because we did the triathlon,
Yes.
and many of our teammates could not swim. But I don't know if you knew that my uncle was Larry Tappan, was the president of CASA in 1974 to 76. So yeah, interesting. That's sort of full circle. And so I've had a couple cousins that and my cousin Jay Tapp just narrowly missed the 1980 team. Well, I guess didn't narrowly miss, made it, but didn't go. So probably would have swam against each other.
Yeah,
I credit a lot of my technical side also to swimming and to that development. I mean, I loved swimming, and the only thing that I hated was waking up early in the mornings. Yeah. So I couldn't handle it. The second comment was, I do think that you have probably the highest percentage of players still involved in some way in the game. So that's definitely a credit to what you've done there. And I mean, a certain credit, obviously, to those players that continue to do that, but you, not too many left not liking the game in some way or another, whether they got into management or coaching or something. So that I think that's huge. And I think we as coaches can all aspire to something like that. That's what we want for our players. So this kind of has to do with this. You talked a lot about developing that relationship with the players, and that, you liked your players and you cared for them and you wanted the best for them. When you got to the national team, you had to make some really tough decisions concerning your players that you liked and that you had that relationship with. So as a coach and as a manager, I think that's what I struggle with the most, is those difficult decisions that you make about what are you, friends or people that you care about, and how do you manage those feelings? How do you, did you have a support network that you went to? I think that that's my biggest struggle, is that I feel so terrible when I have to make those decisions and that person walks out of the room and that you've just crushed their heart. And yeah, I guess just how do you deal with that, and how did you deal with that? I think specifically of Kim and Charlie, 2 incredible goalies that you mentored, and they both loved you and respected you, and you had to make really tough decisions concerning their future.
Yeah, particularly in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I loved pretty much everything I did when it came to coaching, other than those tough conversations with veterans. That was and I was probably a little better at it earlier in my career. As we get older, we get a little bit more emotional. I found that and I'll be 100% with you, I found it more difficult, putting players in the stands. Towards the end of my career, I found that had more of a effect on me emotionally, if you will. Again, I go back to what I said, with Matt. I think transparency is just everything. I think those conversations and your success or failure in those conversations start years previous. And it's building that relationship with your players so that when you do have those conversations, they trust you in the decisions that you're making, your viewpoint. They might not agree with you. And I respect that, and I understand that. They might not agree with you. But the stronger the bond, the stronger the relationship that you have with the players, the more meaningful the conversation is, regardless of whether that conversation is one they want to hear or one they don't want to hear. It doesn't always work. But that's why, for me, it was so important to build relationships with the players even before they got to McGill, if you will, when we were recruiting them, if you will. To me, that's everything. Sammy, I empathize with every coach who has to make those decisions in terms of cutting a veteran or, not playing or not playing any player. I found to be very difficult. I mean, I look back to 2006 and, the decisions made in the gold medal game and, just decisions all along. It was
So did you,
agonizing.
did you burden your wife with that? Did you burden your
Oh, yes, you
coaches
asked me
with
that. Yes, very much so.
What
Yeah.
was,
No, it wasn't a burden. It wasn't a burden.
so what was the specific way that you
Yeah.
you yourself handled the after emotions? Like, I'm sure you were great in the meeting, but how did you handle it after? Did you sit in the dressing room with the coaches and have some scotch? Like, what did you do?
Some with the coaches. My wife. I
Yeah.
mean, my wife was a behavior therapist. She's in psychology. That's what she did. She worked in
Oh, well, that's not fair.
in a hospital. Yeah. So I think that's why we've been married for 47 years. She's got me figured out a little bit, unlike most people. But so yes, my wife was a huge part of that. I could bounce things off her. She was a calming force. I remember a game a long time ago. She would sit up in the stands, she would move around and talk to parents and all that sort of stuff. But I remember once I was getting heated at a referee. I tried to avoid that, but just this one time I got heated. And so at the end of the second period, we're leaving to go back through the tunnel to get to the room. And I remember she ever did this. She leaned over the glass at the top of the bench, and she said, "Peter, calm down." It was the only time but I needed that. And so she was, real good at that. So I did that. And then, Sammy, I'm not going to lie to you. I had so many sleepless nights. Often we'd win a game and I'd sit two real good kids up in the stands, and then I couldn't sleep at night because I, worried. I was upset over them being upset. How am I going to deal with that? I wasn't very good at it. I tried to distract myself from a little bit, but I was just a horrible sleeper. And that was a big part of it. The winning and losing didn't really make me lose sleep. It was, some of the other stuff that, and so I haven't really answered your question other than to say my wife was a huge supporter. I'm a confrontational guy, and not in the sense that I want to create confrontation, but that I want to deal with confrontation. So that if there was stuff that needed to be said, I would get on that right away. Like I never liked to let things sit or fester or whatever it was. If a player was unhappy, I wanted to, and I was pretty good at figuring out who was unhappy. I wanted to deal with that and discuss it and get it out in the open. I think that and maybe that was selfish of me in the sense that I wanted to, have some not closure, but some clarification on some of these situations. So again, I'm not 100% sure I've answered your question, but at least maybe giving you a little bit of insight in terms of how I would go about it.
No, that's been great. And basically you just really cared. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to linger with it and share with as many people as you can. And it's a growing opportunity, I guess, every time you do it as well as a person. So
sure. And again, as I said to Matt, you got to stick with your values, and you have to be making the decisions that fit with your values. I mean, entitlement was never a word that I embraced with our group, and eventually our group never embraced that phrase of entitlement, that they knew that they had to earn it, and that's the way it was built. So
no, I've really enjoyed, Peter, the conversation we had the other day and this one, in having you share this journey with us, and I've got a couple pages full of notes that I know that I'll be going back to from time to time, to just little nuggets coming out of there, those reminders that we all need from time to time, and some key learnings. But one thing you mentioned the other day, Peter, that I thought was kind of neat, was about the 4 stages that you were talking about, from data through wisdom. If you wanted to elaborate on that one, I appreciated that one.
Yeah, but so there's a continuum, if you will, of learning, shall we say, and it starts with data, and I think when you look at coaching, you can kind of relate to that. There's certain data that you gather, and data would be when you're going on the internet and gathering a whole bunch of drills and maybe stats and all that, and you gather this data, and that data then it is converted into information, and so now you have this information, and information can be gained by reading, if you will, listening to podcasts, all that sort of stuff. So you go from data to information, and then you get to the knowledge stage, and knowledge is about experience and education. And knowledge is obviously a very important thing to have whether you're doing your job, or parenting, or teaching, or coaching, or whatever it is. This knowledge, there's an evolution from data to information to knowledge. And then ultimately where you'd like to get to is wisdom. And wisdom is converting that knowledge, if you will, into real life situations, into extrapolating your knowledge into what happens, adjusting things. And so wisdom is really where you want to get to. You want to go from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. I mean, I'm still hoping to get some wisdom at some point, but it's something that we all aspire towards, is being able to use our knowledge into a sense of wisdom, if you will. So that's what I was talking to Jordan about the other day. I can't remember where that came from, but I think it's just sort of an interesting continuum, if you will, particularly in the teaching and coaching field, which, obviously Jordan's been very much involved in. Tim.
Yeah, sorry, I had to slip out there. And it sounds like you might have actually sort of covered this. I just wanted to circle back to, the talk about, which of course we would all agree with, the talk about sort of ice time being based on performance. And just for all the young coaches out there that might be listening, if they have the patience to listen to a bunch of old geezers like us, let's be clear about performance, that it is not simply who scores, who gets the assist, who creates the scoring chances, because ultimately that can be a pretty easy definition of performing in hockey. But it's really more, and this is maybe where Matt's contract to compete comes in too, which I missed, but it's really more about are they performing at their best level of their own ability, and wherever that might fit on the team's depth chart of skill, and are they conforming to the team covenant guidelines, specifically, you know, being a positive influence, being a good teammate, their work ethic, of course. So performance is for the young coaches, again, it's more than, hey, Jordan's going to score for me, and I know he is, and he's the best stick handler, even though he's lazy on the back check and he's bitching out at his teammates on the bench. I'm going to play him because he performs better. He gets results. Well, no, it's not about that. The more you can enforce and reinforce your process of developing people and players and having them adhere to those team guidelines and covenants of work ethic, being positive, being a good teammate, all those sort of things, that's performance, not just who scores. And I know, obviously, you agree with that, but and I thought maybe just state it very clearly and unequivocally, I guess.
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, when we talk about sort of ice time, if you will, or you know, sort of two things come to mind in that, and that we would talk to the players about. One was buy-in. So, you know, that was, you know, buy-in. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Tim. Buying into all the values of the team, both on and off the ice. Buy-in in terms of working hard. And then the second part of it would be performance. So, and performance was, so you had to buy in. So anybody who didn't buy in, I mean, they weren't going to get a chance to perform. I mean, that was not going to happen. Performance didn't dictate buy-in. Buy-in was the cornerstone, if you will. But I think what's important is that for coaches, and you talk about young coaches and clarifying that, is one of the parts that needs to be clarified is what does a coach mean by performance? So what do they mean by those two things, by buy-in and performance? So, you know, like I think, and that's what's important. So, you know, you bring a kid into your office and you say, hey, look, you're just not performing. Well, okay, but you need to be pretty specific in terms of what it is that you mean. And if they already knew before what you meant by performance and what you were looking for in terms of a top performer, now they come in, and if you say, okay, these are the parts of performance that, you know, others are doing better at, that you would like to get better at, here's how you can go about doing it. I think that's real important. That's, you know, all part of the clarity plan, if you will, that definition of, because I think that definition of performance is, you know, can be different from, you know, for some, Tim, the reality is performance is putting the puck in the net. Well, nice, but, you know, if you're, you know, not working hard on tracking back or giving dirty pucks at the wrong time to your teammate or whatever it is, and that's part of performance for me anyway. So I agree with you, Tim. Absolutely. You know that.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody on board has to deal with the dilemma that's been created in minor hockey. I see Michael Bonelli's here in USA Hockey. It's no different. Everybody has lost this perspective philosophy of the life skills to perform your best at whatever you do. And it begins in minor hockey. And feedback, and specific feedback, not just good job, way to go, or we got to work harder. It's the little technical points that need to resonate with the mind of the athlete. And you're the teacher. And it's not generalization about we're not working hard enough, we're losing, and you're all frustrated. And this cycle of response is what seems to happen at higher levels in the NHL. Frustration sets in, but it starts with minor hockey.
Yeah.
If they get it right in minor hockey, it'll be easier. Right now, you can sort those players out in your recruiting. Mike, you're coaching a minor hockey team. Well, you're dealing with those behaviors of those players that are going to be recruited. Same with Jordan. And the idea of being specific is critical, Peter. Thanks very much for being.
Yeah, 100%. I'll just make a comment, Michael, before you speak. With the feedback, it's one of the things that when I started, I noticed that the feedback, and actually even before I started coaching at McGill, I noticed it in teaching or whatever it was. When it came to feedback, I think as humans, we spend a lot of time evaluating feedback as to whether it's positive or negative. So and the message is often missed because we're thinking, oh, that was negative or that was positive or whatever it is. I think the message is often missed. So one of the things that I tried to establish with the players was evaluate feedback as to whether it's meaningful or not. Not whether it's negative, whether you perceive it as being negative or positive, and that doesn't mean I was beating anybody up. I mean, what it meant was I wasn't telling people good shift. If they came in and they had a good shift, I said specifically why it was. So what I asked the players is to evaluate the feedback as to whether it was going to help them perform, help them as a student, as a person, or whatever it was. And so to make that connection between feedback and meaningfulness, not just whether, oh, that was negative. Even if they did perceive it as slightly negative, would it help them to get better? And again, I'm not talking about beating people up or any of that. I'm not into that in the least. But I think so, Wally, I agree with you. That specificity of feedback is so important. And certainly at McGill, that's what the players wanted. Michael.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment on that portion of what you're talking about with the players, because I think, to Wally's point, that when you're getting players at the university level or the major junior, hopefully a lot of those players have been the ones that have gotten the education, right, and the understanding of of not being entitled, because most of the time you can filter those players out. Like to your point, even at the youth hockey level, I don't want to. I mean, when I see players being recruited to play on a certain team, or you see them, they have 7 different equipment bags in the back of their car because they played for 7 different teams. You're just inheriting another player that is somebody else's problem, right? So you're able to eliminate that player right off the get-go. So hopefully you're doing your research. But I think at the youth level, I know here in the U.S., that piece of the players' understanding, because I think what kids do is they value the person on points. They value, like, why are you sitting that person? Like, I'll see it all the time with the kids, like, oh, he scored a goal, but it was the wrong play. It was absolutely the wrong play. Like, that player should have made 5 other different plays before that goal got scored. And this is why we're going to have this discussion, because at some point you have to learn that that's not going to work. And the kid will say, well, and all the kids on the bench say, well, it worked, so it is working. So I think it's a matter of saying when you're speaking to your youth player, I think a lot of it comes down to when you say young coaches, but I've seen plenty of old coaches that do this too, right? That they just are playing the best players to win the game. And but maybe we're not educated enough at the youth level to teach those values and what, where ultimately we want to get players, and that's this development, right? We want to get them better. What are we instilling in those players at the youth level that, to your point, aren't negative and positive? It's just, this is what it is. I mean, here, take it the way you need to take it, but this is what I'm seeing from you. And it's not because you scored 9 goals. Like, you scored 5 goals, but you were on the ice for 7. So we have to find a way to. But I think the way kids see it, I know you see these statistics all the time out there that kids would rather be on a winning team. They always say, a lot of people say, oh, they want to play. They'd rather play all the time and be on a losing team. But I don't know. I don't see that at a lot of youth players. I see kids that want to be on the winning team. And if they aren't contributing to that winning team, they're going to look the other way at that kid. That's the cool kid that's scoring all the goals and winning the game. And I think that's actually a bad thing for our sport.
And so why is it that kids now want to be on a winning team? Like what? So how do we get to that?
Right. I think that's the prestige of, well, I'm wearing this AAA jacket. I didn't really contribute to the win, right? I mean, I think that's the way we're associating these kids with success is that I was able to place you on a team that's successful, and all you really did was raise your hand after a kid scored a goal. Like, you didn't really contribute to that kid scoring a goal. So I think finding ways to then get those players at the youth level to understand what value it really is. And value isn't just winning the game and winning that championship as individual players. Your value has to be, what have you done to contribute to that success or failure?
Yeah. And I think, so my point would be like, yeah, the young people, the kids have that mentality. So how do they get that mentality? I think it comes, cultural, generational, parenting changes. And, I think that we're in a resulting generation, if you will.
Yep.
Success is based on results. And I with this U11 team that I see, a lot of it comes from the parents, if you will. The coach, he's good. He does a good job. He's a skilled guy. He's a pretty good teacher. Gets a little emotional. He'll kind of play the good players a little bit more. I came up in the coach's room that, some of the players in a tournament game weren't playing the way some of the other players will, which I'm not supportive of. And one of the coaches said, well, they have to learn that sometimes they're going to sit on the bench. And I looked at him and I go, these kids are 9 years old. They're 9 and 10 years old. That'll come. They don't need that now. They need to play. They need to feel part of it. They need to feel value. They need to, but it trickles down certainly from the parents. And I've had a chance to see more of that certainly this year with being involved with Minor hockey. So.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, but great. I really appreciate all the feedback too today. That was great. It's so much stuff you can take, as pieces from a lot of these calls. Like, you guys are dealing with such high level players already, and the cream of the crop, for instance, right? And you still see the same chinks in the armor that you would see for a rec team. And I think it's just people, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's so interesting to be able to go to a youth hockey coach and say, listen, this is at 9 years old, just please play, find a way to get and find a way to coach the kids up. And I think it's hard. It's really hard because you get because of the culture we're instilling now. It's not that you're coaching kid and parent and probably the other coaches, right? You're coaching your coaching staff, you're coaching your parents, you're coaching your kids.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, for sure.
A lot more involved.
Absolutely.
Michael, I'm not sure, Mike, if I've done the mission statement exercise with your podcast people yet, but I'm sitting here saying, well, this is 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We put this reflective piece in where people, parents, administrators, coaches, and kids had to participate in it. And I think when I did the exercise with a few people, I experimented with Danielle Goyette at the U of C. She was head coaching. And I started with, and I'm going to ask everyone here, how do you win? Like, I mean win. What do you have to do to win? Score clock, period. Peter?
You have to get good people, and you have to make your people good. I think that's really what it's all about. And, and I think that you got to develop your people. And I really do. Wally, we lost in 2012. The national championship was in at U of A. We had one goal scored on us in the national championship, and we didn't win. And it was the most talented team that I'd had, 2012. But we didn't win. And the reason we didn't win was I didn't think the team was as cohesive as some of the team. It was probably the only year that we had. Well, maybe there was one other year that I would say we were in that same boat. But we didn't win because we didn't have the most cohesive team. When the years that we won, that's what we had. And not everybody played, but we had very cohesive teams. We had a real good strategy in terms of development of our players. And I mean, we had good skill too. There was no getting around it. But, again, I go back to what I said before. Everybody on the team felt valued. And I think that that's how you win. I just don't think that dysfunctional teams have any chance of winning, to be honest with you.
Anybody else? What do you have to do? What do the players have to do? What does the coach have to do? What do the parents have to do so they can be the best they can be? Define winning. You won, Peter. In reality,
I think
you won.
sometimes you can win with dysfunctional teams on the scoreboard. You can certainly, we've had some Toronto Arrows teams over the years that were very dysfunctional, some Team Canada teams over the years that were very dysfunctional that won
Good
on the
point.
scoreboard.
2002, yes.
Yes.
Point. Yeah, you may
But
make
my
a good
point is, Mike, when you do the exercise, everything you do related to development requires hard work, requires teaching, requires learning and having fun. You want to feel good. You want to be a team. And so you're responsible for that, making it an enjoyable experience. And it's based on values, life skills that you're teaching the athlete. That's the process that leads to winning. And if you really do coach that way, the essence of winning, now Peter mentioned they weren't cohesive. Why weren't they as cohesive as they could have been is the question to reflect on.
Yep.
And I think that's where what we're getting at is do everything you can in your power in terms of the process and planning and the preparation. And it will happen more often than not that you might be lucky enough to win on the score clock, but it doesn't really matter. You lose, you're going to learn, and that's why we're having this. We're learning more even at our age, and I always say, Peter, we haven't made the point yet, but the older you get, the more you realize you don't know very much. Why else would we stay on here to have these discussions? Yeah. There's so much more to be learned, and that's what I've come to realize. Peter, when you brought up the question, the thing that you would change, do you recall what it was?
What I would change? Well, so I think I said about family time and listening skills were the two things that
here right now, and I'm saying family time.
Oh yeah.
Because exactly like you, my life was consumed with my job.
Yep.
And we all are. We get caught up in our jobs.
Yep.
Now that you're retired, you're looking for things to do and getting back stuck in the road. But the family time is the biggest regret of all I would have at my age. But other than that, the technical things, the X's and O's, and managing the bench, I learned that. That's what I would learn at the professional level. You have to adapt to the level of players that you're working with in the league you're coaching in. But there's a balance, there's an art. Yep. Getting most out of everybody. And interesting enough, some accidental coaches have had pretty good success.
Absolutely.
Scotty Bowman, I think, was one of them.
Yep. And
you're talking stages of competence, Peter. And I talked to Jordan about it. I present on that stages of competence at every coaching clinic I do. We all begin unconsciously incompetent. The first time I touched a computer, I didn't have a clue. I didn't even know you had to plug it in, let alone how to turn it on. It was daunting, but at Hockey Canada, I got to the stage that many coaches don't get to. Conscious incompetence. I was aware I didn't have a clue. I wasn't sure what I was doing. And I went and asked those young people, and you can ask kids today how to use a phone, how to use an app that I can't use. And if you don't ask, you ain't going to do it. You're going to keep coaching and screwing up minds and not accomplishing what you could out of the sport. The third stage, if you last, hey, you know this works, conscious competence. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. And that's the one we hope everybody gets to. You're conscious. Everybody here is consciously competent. And the ultimate stage, I call it the hockey clinics, the Scotty Bowman stage. And that's unconscious competence, just intuition, knows what he's doing. And those were accidental coaches, so that the X's and O's are tied into it, but not as much as we think. And I think we've had a real good session today dealing with all of that.
I've enjoyed it.
Okay, anybody else, any questions, any thoughts? Michael, thanks for being on today. What level are you coaching again, Michael, right now?
Well, so officially I'm coaching 14U. So a bunch of right now, basically all 07 year birth. So it's, it's the year here in the U.S. that it's right before, we're classified as a AAA team. It's basically, the year when they really start to say, okay, are we going to get selected for something? Do I get recruited? Am I looking at prep schools? So it becomes a lot for the parents. There's so much anxiety, for the parents, right? That they can't, I don't know. I just see, I work with, 7 or 8 organizations now as a consultant. And I just hear the same theme over and over and over again, that it's so, and I actually brought this from one of Tim's conversations about his team, about sometimes you just got to put the ice away, forget about it, and do this, do the building of the person and the kid. And so I love that stuff. I mean, I think, and Wally, we'll definitely have you on the podcast, because I think, what you could bring to the table is this other perspective of, yes, of course we all want to win. We all need X's and O's. We all need strategy. Everybody understands that, but none of that works without the person and the belief that everyone is pulling together for a common goal, including in my case, mostly the parents, because they're the most influential people that we have, because they're with the kids for, 22 and a half hours a day more than me.
Yeah, and I was gonna sort of chime in a bit ago about, when we were talking about, the kids wanting to be on winning teams. Who wouldn't want to be on a winning team? We all, of course. Like, hey, let me see, lousy team, good team. That's the easy part. The part a lot of parents and kids don't get is, do they consider, or can they consider, how unhappy they're going to be as parents and as players if they're not getting any ice time, if they're not being able to contribute, if they're not feeling valued by their coaches. That's what they don't consider. It's great to be on a winning team, of course, if you're feeling valued, you're contributing, and you're playing to some degree. So that's getting better. Yeah, kind of the piece that's missing. And I was going to say, I totally agree with Wally that in those kind of situations, the mission statement piece is missing, and the process over and before and above results piece is missing, maybe on the part of the coach of the team, maybe on the part of the parents, maybe on the part of the player themselves. So it certainly all does tie together. And the one interesting story to tie it together in a kind of a weird way, and I've told before, is the Marty St. Louis story. When Mike, my good friend Mike Gilligan, was recruiting him at Vermont, Marty was being recruited by everybody, all the best programs, And when he finally decided to come to Vermont, Mike, of course, was overjoyed. And, you know, and he was one day, he said, Marty, like, why did you come to Vermont? Like, you could have gone to Minnesota, Michigan, all the big powers at the time. And Marty just looked at him and said, you needed me more. You know, he knew he was going to get the play and be valued and contribute, and he wanted to be sure that he wanted to enjoy himself and the game, and he knew that was important to him. And of course, it was a great decision. You know, he got tied in with Tim Thomas there and his other buddy from Montreal, and they had some great success there. And Marty obviously turned into a terrific player and is now a real great coach as well. Yeah, so anyway, you know, it's that process before results, and Wally's mission statement piece, which totally embodies that philosophy of process before results.
Yeah. Tim, I'm reading Marty's quote from his 47-minute presentation. Get really good at getting better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Outstanding. You know, the guy knew what he wanted to do. He was clear in terms of his goals and his mission. He was gifted and talented. And I don't know about, you know, the man personally, but in terms of an elite athlete and a driven person, to understand himself and where he's going, I think he's the epitome of an individual athlete figuring out a team sport and achieving the highest degree of success in it. My pet peeve over many years, Tim, was Marty's stick length, but he could score.
Yeah. Hey, there's exceptions to every rule. And there's another guy who's not bad at that part of the process of getting really good at getting better. And he wears 87 for Pittsburgh. Like, he's relentless in his pursuit of getting better. And it's obviously served him very well. I think the guy in Edmonton is pretty good at that too.
Yeah. 87 eats up wingers and spits them out, though. They can't keep up. Anyway, that's it for me, boys. Thanks for having me.